Thank you so much for the invitation. I hope to be there in person next year. Eliko's very nicely showed us the importance of alignment, and that's going to come up again and again in this talk, even though this talk is going to span everything from principles applicable to one-level spondies, which you see, and all of us have fluoro spots like the one on the left where we've done an ALIF and perk screws and corrected very nicely. And then the x-rays on the right, which is a grade 4, the same principles are going to apply here. So my disclosures. And essentially, when we talk about the evidence that we have, the first 3 of those bullet points have some evidence, and then we start to kind of drop off. So we know that fusion has more durable outcomes compared to decompression, and instrumented has a higher rate of fusion compared to non-instrumented. And now we're starting to get more and more evidence about, 360 fusion has a lot better correction when you do an interbody, of course, compared to non. But as far as MIS versus open and who actually needs you to do direct decompression, those are some points that are more debatable. What I hope to say today is that alignment is always critical, even when you're doing one-level fusions. And this sequence of fluorospots on this slide, basically, so here's a grade 4 that's being corrected from an all-posterior approach. But the same principles to do that are the same things I would do with a one-level TLIF, where I'm removing the facets completely. I'm giving a, really adequate intradiscal release, and you can see then, it's very easy to reduce even a grade 4 with this. So I think that the principles fortunately apply across all grades of spondies. But as far as the good news, all of us see isthmic spondy in our clinics, and it predictably causes leg and back pain very often, and the patients do really well. And then the bad news is, which approach should I do and what's best? Because there's a very different skill set needed for each of these approaches, as far as, anterior versus lateral MIS versus an open TLIF. And we all have varying degrees of comfort with that, depending on where and when we trained. So common pathology, 5% average globally, variable symptomatic rate. We still don't have a great answer as far as that, and we're not treating people who are asymptomatic for this. And really, a lot of patients present with back pain as part of the component to this. Only 7% on average have leg pain only. So I hear some people say, oh, back pain doesn't usually get better with fusions, but this is one of the instances where it very often does. So as far as the cycle of progression of this pathology, the x-ray on the left is an incidental finding in a 34-year-old and was completely asymptomatic at that point. Although if you look closely, you can see that the L5-S1 disc space height is getting narrowed, and he's starting to get some indentation of the S1 end plate, indicating that he's got movement across the 5-1 disc space. And if you look 12 years later, now he's got L5 radiculopathy from foraminal stenosis, and he certainly is bone on bone as far as end plates. So this is, of course, a cycle that just perpetuates itself when you've got lack of posterior element stability. And these patients end up using compensatory extension once they lose the height at their disc space, particularly at 4-5 and 5-1, because as we know, that's the most important area of lordosis for the spine. So then the patients, of course, develop standing intolerance, and they've got, pelvic tilt from this, and it keeps going and going the more they load the posterior column. So as far as treatment guidelines for this, there's really, the last time NAS updated isthmic spondy guidelines was 2014. So take all of this with a grain of salt today. And what we'll notice is, of course, in 2014, although we knew about sagittal alignment and we're learning more every day, it wasn't making its way into guidelines yet. So basically, if you look for guidelines, the only thing you'll find is that it's reasonable to operate on these patients. You can do either posterior lateral or 360 fusions, and the patients do pretty well. And 360 gives you higher radiographic fusion, but there really wasn't anything about alignment or interbodies or MIS versus open in these guidelines. So as far as our surgical treatment, we know that we're always going to first pay attention to the symptoms that patients are complaining of and try to do the least possible surgery to address the symptoms. But as far as alignment goes, we always need to consider that. And so if someone asks, are you getting EOS x-rays on everyone? Actually, the answer is pretty much yes. That's a very isolated problem. And we also have to consider our own individual skill sets and also what the patient can tolerate, what's ideal for them. And so when we talk about what we're going to come up with, most of the time at L5-S1, I find that foraminal stenosis is symptomatic. So a lot of L5 radiculopathy when you get L5-S1 spondy. Central stenosis, of course, is not usually a role here. And at 4-5, it seems that facet arthropathy, the lateral recess stenosis, often gives you a component of traversing nerve root radiculopathy with L5 traversing at the L4-5 level. And sometimes, of course, you're going to get L4 radiculopathy from exiting nerves at that level as well. So as far as why spinal alignment is crucial, sometimes I hear people say, oh, if I'm just doing one level fusion, the patient can compensate for that elsewhere, even if I make it, suboptimal. And I really strongly believe that that is not a true statement. If there's a hill to die on, I'm going to die on that hill, because I think that when you lock in alignment that's non-physiologic, you can quickly worsen a patient, even if they were compensating on their own somewhat for that alignment. I can't tell you how many people I've seen that have had flat one-level fusions, particularly at 5-1, for a spondy that was fused in situ that very quickly developed really symptomatic problems at L4-5. So I think that's really critical. And again, Alekos did a nice job of talking about why. I think as far as, if you hear talks and someone's always doing a lateral interbody approach at L4-5, and that person's always having great results and their X-rays are great and they tell you their patients do great, sometimes it gets tempting to say, oh, I'm going to become an L4-5 lateral interbody surgeon. And if you want to train and practice and go to labs and learn how to do that, that's awesome. But if you do an approach because you think it's probably the right thing and it's not the best thing in your hands, it's still the wrong surgery. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow as a surgeon, but we need to make ourselves better all the times and also be safe with what we're doing. And also considering patient-specific anatomy when you're considering an anterior and lateral approaches can't be overstated. So for a 4-5 spondy, sure, a lot of people can do great A-lifts, but if you have a patient who's got a lot of great vessel calcification and a bifurcation right at 4-5 or at the bottom part of the disc space, that's going to be a tough thing for a vascular surgeon to safely retract for you. So that's just something to keep in mind. And so when to choose what surgery is really going to be kind of the meat of what we're doing here. And do we need an interbody and what kind and how? And I'm going to try to catch us up on time a little bit, but basically no approach has superior evidence. I promise I won't stop the talk right here. I'll go into a little bit more detail than that, but each of us, of course, thinks we have the answer, and here's the evidence that we do have. So there have been a lot of studies that, fusion has a lot more durable, lasting outcome as far as functional improvement. And as far as non-instrumented versus instrumented and with or without an interbody, the fusion with instrumentation rate is, of course, higher. And interestingly, this JBJS study is often quoted. The patients who had both interbody and not interbody, but with instrumentation, they had more improvement in the VAS back, higher satisfaction with their treatment, but a really high reoperation rate, more than 10 years. And I would posit that, although there's really no way to prove this because this was not an alignment study, I would posit that, if a study published in 2017, probably we didn't have as much attention to sagittal alignment. And that could be a potential reason why there was such a high reoperation rate in the instrumented patients. We all know when we do some of these soft non-instrumented fusions where the patient's probably going to fuse, but maybe if they don't fuse really solidly, they're going to do okay. So that is just my own personal sort of way to take this study when I look at it. And as far as putting in an interbody versus fusing in situ, it's a no-brainer that when you put an interbody in, you should improve spinal alignment compared to not doing anything with a flattened disc space. But you have to be really careful about what type of interbody you put in. And as Alekos said, you can put in a very lordotic interbody, but if you don't release the posterior elements, you're not going to get the correction. You're just going to subside across the end plate. And if you put the interbody very posterior in the disc space, you can block a lot of your correction, even if you've done a good release of the posterior elements. So I think those are critical things when you're considering how to treat these people. And so I think really, I truly believe that if you have an aligned one level, your outcome is going to be more durable than if you did not align that level, but followed the patients for a year and maybe they're not yet symptomatic from their evolving flat back. So, and as far as MIS versus open, we don't have a lot of dedicated Isthmic spondy literature. There's some, but the largest evidence is in degen spondy. And of course, at the 5-year QOD study, a one-level TLIF for degen spondy, MIS and open have same outcomes. Of course, MIS has less DBL and in some studies has a shorter length of stay. So here back to the hill that I'm on. The alignment always matters in every fusion. So, when all of us see this X-ray in our clinic, when I first remember as a trainee seeing this, of course, I'm thinking about, what's happening to that nerve root there? How am I going to protect that nerve root? And I do still think of that, of course, but then literally the first thing I think is, wow, that 5-1 disc space is flat and the patient has to be compensating above it. So when I look at the X-ray here that has the red sign on it, as in don't do that, that patient might even have felt great after that surgery, stabilizing that level. And the surgeon, that did that and the patient did well, thought, oh, great, that's a good solution. But I would be shocked, really, if in several years that patient didn't develop very quick adjacent segment disease from having to hyperextend across 4-5 to make up for having almost no lordosis at 5-1. So if you're going to do a non-instrumented fusion, if you're going to do an instrumented fusion without an interbody, I think that's okay if you somehow have got the alignment considered and got it fairly improved. So here is an example. There's no interbody there, but there was compression across the posterior screws, and there is a fairly amount of appropriate lordosis for 5-1 for this patient. So it's okay. You don't have to have an interbody every time, I guess. In my hands, I usually do for healing rate, but this is an example of actually having a mobile enough disc space to make that better. And of course, what I really like, although I don't use a lot of expandable cages, is that I can see a lot of segmental lordosis restoration there. And so that picture on the right, of course, would make me very happy. Alignment always matters. And there is some evidence that patients who have isthmic spondy actually have higher baseline PIs, and probably that loading of the posterior column in the setting of a high PI and more lordosis at baseline. You've heard the term the nutcracker effect, where you're crushing down on the posterior elements and can cause a pars defect that way, is probably has some traction here. So I think it's just absolutely critical to consider, patients with higher baseline PI, they absolutely need to have more lordosis at baseline. And if you lock them in very flat, that's a spectacular way to help someone fail quickly, even the higher the PI is. Every study that I read that says TLIF is a kyphosing event, I really want to just put an asterisk on it and say in some hands, because you can get really great lordosis with TLIFs, but it really depends on your technique. I think it's fairly obvious that, if you're a great MIS surgeon and you don't want to resect much of the posterior elements, you can do TLIFs in patients and have great results, and that's a great thing. But if you have a really flat disc space and you don't do any release of the contralateral facet, you just leave it there, it's really hard to get, a lordosis correction operation that way. And so the top row of the x-rays in this slide basically show you that this patient went from having 23 degrees of lordosis to 33 degrees of lordosis in those segments with an ALIF. And in the bottom slide, there is a TLIF cage there. I promise you, it's not a lot. They went from having 22 degrees of lordosis to 14 degrees of lordosis, and that is going to hurt. So what I would say is TLIFs absolutely can give you a lot of lordosis. And the technique for doing so is, of course, completely resecting both facets. And, when you resect the superior articular process flush with the pedicle, let's say if we're at L5-S1, you resect the SAP flush with the S1 pedicle, you've got a great view of the disc space. You really can see that you're not going to hurt that exuding nerve root. You can see things much better. And so it really is helpful as a safety technique also. And very often for spondies, I'll do a bilateral approach. Whether or not I put in bilateral cages, I'll certainly do bilateral discectomies, and it'll help me with realignment and achieving the lordosis that I want. So, if you're going to do an ALIF, that's great. You don't get 20 degrees of lordosis with a 20-degree cage. And again, I know a couple other lecturers have said that. So that's something really important to remember. You can't plan your correction based on the lordosis of the cage. You can plan your correction based on the release of the spine that you do. And so to optimize your lordosis with ALIFs, even if you're doing perc screws, you need to do some sort of a facet osteotomy or posterior element resection to allow you to compress posteriorly and maximize that lordosis. And as far as perc screws versus open, perc screws, you actually go through the muscle, and it's, they're more miserable probably the first day if you don't have a local block, but somehow they do better in some studies with VAS back pain long term. And I would say just remembering, if you are always an ALIF surgeon for spondies, there is going to be a patient who has unfavorable vessel anatomy to an ALIF at 4-5. And that patient, I hope, doesn't find you. But if you see yourself booking that patient, like, this probably isn't safe, there's got to be a different answer before you go into the OR that way. So in general, do what is safest with you, but always be on the lookout for those red flags. And finally, this is not something that's really published in any paper, but this is something that I've learned the really hard way about who needs a direct decompression. And there have been, a lot of studies on this showing what great restoration of foraminal height volume you have with interbodies, and most patients really don't need a direct decompression. And that's somewhat true. But I would say that the triple threat in spondylolisthesis that I put on this slide is basically what happens where those three stars are. Each of those areas is affected really greatly by spondylolisthesis, even more than by just a normal spondylosis degenerative process. And so, the middle picture there, the SAP becomes, really enlarged very often. And if it's a bony hook pushing into that foramen, doesn't matter how much you distract across the disc space, or even how much you reduce the spondy, you still are going to have a nerve root, an exiting nerve root that's very irritated by that. So that's a patient that, in my mind, needs a direct decompression. That's a great way for me to get a patient to fail to have long-term radiculopathy relief with an otherwise good operation. And even when you're doing a TLIF, you have to be mindful to resect the tip of that SAP, because it sometimes is, it actually is away from your view, and it's up right up against the pedicle above. So there at L4-5, it's right up against the L4 pedicle area. And so you have to really reach up there and safely sort of sweep that away from the exiting nerve root and resect it. And in my mind, that's the best way to do the best decompression there. And then the famous posterior inferior end plate osteophyte. That little guy becomes a traction osteophyte if you distract across the 5-1 disc space. And I think probably a lot of the L5 radiculopathy that's new after L5S1 ALIFs can be blamed on a traction osteophyte from the inferior end plate of L5. So if I see that, I actually will not go anteriorly, because in my mind, I do grade ALIF, distract there, but I'm just ripping that osteophyte up against the nerve root as I distract across that inner space. And so what I do, and if I see that traction osteophyte, is I do an all posterior approach, and I'll of course resect the posterior, resect both facets completely, and I'll actually take an osteotome along the inferior end plate, which you can see, quite nicely, especially if you use a wheeled laminar spreader to distract across the remaining posterior elements. You really can see the disc space quite well, and very safely look down into that disc space, protect the exiting nerve root, and take an osteotome across that osteophyte and resect it. I personally think that's really important. So thank you so much for your time and attention and the opportunity to talk. And I think these principles apply from grade 1 spondy all the way up to grade 4. So I hope that that's somewhat useful in considering. Thank you.
Kristen, we all really enjoyed that. And there's so many words of wisdoms and pearls of experience that come through there. And I particularly love and want to point out your vignette about the inferior osteophyte at 5S1, the traction generator for the 5 root. One more time, why do we get L5 root palsy so readily? And is it the under-recognized inferior osteophytic traction spur?
I do, yeah.
So Chris is getting ready in the lab, but sorry, we had a little interference. So just give us, why do we get L5 root palsies? Is this that inferior osteophyte? What's going on there?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I actually thought Chris was agreeing with me, which was fantastic. He's my boss, but no. I think the L5 radiculopathy comes because when you have that osteophyte there and you distract across the disc space, that osteophyte is basically elevating in the volume of the foramen up to where the nerve root normally lives, which is closer to the superior aspect of the foramen. So as you're making the foramen bigger from the front, basically you're pushing that osteophyte up into where the nerve root is even more. So I think that in my mind is why that happens.
Great. And then the next question is going to the pelvis for a more high grade or very steep angled pelvis, high sacral slope. Should we go to the pelvis more often? I've had a couple of, when I've done aggressive deformity reductions, sacral fractures. So when and where do we go to the pelvis?
For me, in a grade 4, I always go to the pelvis. I know that's a controversial statement, but I also haven't had a failure doing it that way, and I have seen the converse. So if I'm doing a large reduction now, and obviously not every patient who's a grade 4 needs to have a reduction. It depends on a lot of things, their degree of radiculopathy and their Russelli type. But I think if you're going to do a reduction, you need to do pelvic fixation.
Kristen, next year we need to have you in person, but thank you for an excellent.
Yes.
And we'll switch over to the lab. Thank you.